The alien princess had always lived in safety, surrounded by guards, teachers, and servants who filled her world with tales of danger that existed beyond her planet. Among all those tales, the ones that frightened her the most were about the humans. Since childhood, she had been told that humans were born on a world so dangerous that even the smallest creatures there were deadly. Her tutors described them as ruthless survivors, a people who grew strong only because their home forced them to fight for every breath. They were said to be violent, aggressive, and heartless in the way they dealt with other races. The princess often listened in silence, wide-eyed, imagining creatures with sharp faces and cruel eyes who laughed while conquering weaker worlds. Even though she had never seen a human with her own eyes, the picture painted in her mind was enough to keep her awake at night. The stories always ended the same way. Humans took what they wanted, and nothing could stop them. She grew up believing that humans were more like monsters than people. Whenever her planet's council discussed politics, someone would always mention Earth or the humans, and there was always a shadow of tension in the room. The princess never understood all the details of these meetings, but she understood fear. She could feel it in her mother's careful words and in her father's long, heavy silences. As the years passed, whispers of war spread through her world. The humans had grown stronger and their fleets reached farther into the stars. Many worlds resisted, but few could hold out against them. Her people tried to avoid open conflict, but the princess could see the unease in the eyes of her advisors. Every treaty, every negotiation seemed fragile, as though one wrong step would bring disaster. Then came the announcement that changed her life. One evening in the grand hall of her palace, the council gathered with her parents. She was summoned to stand before them, not yet knowing what news they had. Her father, with a face carved in stone, told her that an agreement had been made to protect their world. To ensure peace between their people and the humans, she would be married to a human leader. The word struck her like a storm. At first, she thought she had heard wrong, but the silence that followed told her it was no mistake. Her heart pounded in her chest, her throat tightened, and for a long moment she could not speak. Marry a human? A ruthless, merciless human? The very idea filled her with dread. She wanted to protest, to cry out, but the eyes of the council pressed on her like heavy weights. Her father explained it was the only way to avoid war, the only way to protect their people. She was a princess, and her duty was greater than her own fears. Still, the thought of being tied forever to a human made her tremble. That night, alone, in her chamber, she could not sleep. She walked restlessly, her long gown dragging across the smooth floors, while her mind replayed the story she had heard. She saw herself standing beside a man with a cruel smile, someone who would see her not as a person but as a prize of victory. She imagined him commanding her life with no kindness, treating her as a symbol of power. She covered her face with her hands and wished she could escape, but duty was stronger than her wishes. The days that followed were filled with preparations. Every moment reminded her of what was coming. Servants sewed gowns fit for a royal union, advisors prepared her for human customs, and guards trained for the long journey ahead. Yet none of these details could calm the storm inside her heart. She felt as though she was being carried toward her fate with no power to resist. Her ladies-in-waiting whispered among themselves, wondering what the humans looked like up close. Some imagined they would be tall and frightening with harsh features. Others believed their strength was unmatched, and that standing near them would be like standing near a wild beast. Each whisper only added to her unease. She remained silent, afraid that if she spoke, her trembling voice would reveal her weakness. At meals, her appetite vanished. At night, her dreams were filled with shadows of faceless humans reaching for her. She would wake in fear, clutching her blanket, trying to remind herself that she was strong, that she was royal, that she could endure this. But when the morning came, the fear always returned. Her mother tried to comfort her, sitting beside her one evening in the garden. The queen spoke softly, telling her daughter that humans might not be as terrible as the stories claimed. But even her mother's voice wavered as though she did not fully believe her own words. The princess leaned against her mother's shoulder, wishing she could hold on to that comfort forever. Yet deep down she knew her path was already set. The journey to the human ship was the longest walk of her life. Her legs felt heavy, and her chest tightened with each step toward the docking bay. Around her the guards marched in silence, their armor shining, their faces cold with duty. The princess kept her head low, her veil covering her expression, but her hands shook beneath the fabric. She wondered if the human would be waiting with a cruel stare. She wondered if his voice would cut through her like a blade. Every rumor, every warning echoed in her mind. She felt as though she was walking not toward a union but toward a cage. And yet, there was no turning back. The future of her people rested on her shoulders, and she had no choice but to carry it. As the ship loomed closer, dark and towering in the bay, her heart pounded harder than ever. She whispered a prayer under her breath, asking for strength, asking for mercy. What lay beyond those doors was still unknown to her, but in her heart she braced for the worst. The day of meeting arrived sooner than the princess was ready for. Her heart felt heavy from the moment she woke up. Servants helped her dress in a ceremonial gown, carefully placing the veil over her face, but their hands could not calm her, shaking. Every fold of fabric felt like a chain, binding her to a future she had not chosen. When they finished, they stepped back and admired her appearance, but inside she felt small and fragile, like a bird about to be placed inside a cage. The walk to the human ship was quiet except for the sound of footsteps echoing in the grand hallways. The princess tried to keep her back straight, her movements graceful, but the weight in her chest threatened to pull her down. Her guards surrounded her, their faces hard as stone. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. She could feel their tension. Even they, trained warriors, seemed uneasy about what lay ahead. When they finally reached the docking port, the sight of the human vessel struck her. It was enormous, much larger than any ship her people possessed. Its dark metal surface gleamed under the lights, and its sharp angles made it look like a beast lying in wait. The princess swallowed hard. If the ship itself looked this intimidating, what kind of man commanded it? As they entered, she noticed the humans stationed inside. They stood tall, their uniforms neat, their eyes sharp. She tried not to look directly at them, but even through the veil she could sense their presence. They were unlike her people, broader, firmer, carrying themselves with a discipline that was almost frightening. Their faces were unreadable, their movements precise. It was as if the air itself changed when she stepped into their space, heavy, with authority and order. Her escort led her through long halls until they reached a wide chamber. She understood at once that this was where the meeting would take place. Her heart thumped wildly as the doors opened. Inside stood the man she had been told was to be her husband. The princess did not lift her eyes at first. She kept her gaze, on the ground, clinging to the last shred of courage she had. Her hands tightened together, her knuckles pale beneath the fabric of her gown. She feared that if she looked at him, she would see the cruelty she had been warned about all her life. Better, she thought, to delay that moment as long as she could. The room was quiet except for the sound of footsteps as she was guided forward. The closer she came, the more her chest tightened. She could feel his presence ahead of her, tall and unmoving, like a shadow that blocked out everything else. She wondered if he was glaring at her, if his face carried the harshness she imagined. Then, the escort stopped. She knew this was the moment. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she lifted her head. Her breath caught. The man before her was not what she had expected. He was tall, yes, and his uniform carried the weight of authority, but his face was not cruel. His eyes, though steady and firm, did not carry the coldness she had feared. Instead, they held something else, something she could not name at first. His gaze was strong, yet there was a calmness within it, as though he was not here to frighten her but to assure her. He bowed his head slightly in greeting, and when he spoke, his voice was deep but not harsh. There was no sharpness, no command in his tone, only measured respect. He said her name carefully as though he had practiced it to honor its sound. The princess froze, stunned. She had expected arrogance, perhaps a mocking smile, but there was none of that. Instead, the man regarded her not as a possession, not as a trophy, but as a person. It unsettled her in a new way, because it was so different from everything she had prepared for. Her mind raced. Could this be a trick? A mask to hide the ruthlessness beneath? She could not know. And yet in that moment standing before him, she felt her fear shift ever so slightly. The silence stretched, heavy but not unbearable. The commander waited patiently, not rushing her, not demanding words from her. Finally, she lowered her gaze again, unsure of what to say. But inside, her thoughts were tumbling like waves. Her attendant stepped aside, leaving the two of them standing with only a few guards and advisors present. She could feel every eye watching, but her focus remained on the man who stood before her. He did not move closer without reason, nor did he try to overwhelm her with his presence. Instead, he seemed to hold himself in careful restraint, as if he understood her hesitation. The princess found her hands trembling less than before. She did not know why. Perhaps it was because he had not spoken cruelly. Perhaps it was because, for the first time, she had looked into human eyes and found something other than ruthlessness. Still, her fear was not gone. Deep within, the stories of her childhood clung to her heart like chains. She remembered the warnings, the whispers, the images of merciless humans. Could one moment erase a lifetime of fear? She did not think so. And yet, she could not deny the small spark of surprise that had lit inside her when she heard his voice. The meeting was brief, formal, filled with words exchanged between their advisors. She barely spoke, her voice quiet, but the commander did not force her to. He answered with calm assurance, speaking not only to his people but to hers, as though he sought to build a bridge rather than burn one. When it ended, she was led away. Again, her heart pounding not with the same terror as before, but with something more complicated. Confusion, doubt, a question that would not leave her mind. What if the stories had been wrong? As she returned to her quarters on the ship, the princess sat in silence, her hands resting on her lap. She thought of his eyes, his voice, the way he had not pressed her. It was so different from the monster she had imagined. Still, she told herself not to trust too quickly. She had been raised on fear, and fear does not vanish easily. But as she lay down to rest, one thought kept circling in her mind. If this was ruthlessness, it was not the kind she had been warned of. The princess could not forget the first moment she dared to look into the human commander's eyes. That single glance replayed again and again in her mind as she sat in her quarters, staring at the walls. She had expected sharpness, arrogance, and cruelty. Instead, she had found calmness and a strange warmth. It unsettled her because it clashed with everything she had been taught. For as long as she could remember, she had believed humans were merciless, but now doubt had slipped quietly into her heart. The next day, she was summoned to another meeting, a more private one this time. Her advisors insisted she attend, saying it was important for her to begin speaking with the commander herself. The thought made her chest tighten. She had no idea what to say to a man who was supposed to be her husband, especially when fear and uncertainty still circled inside her like restless birds. She entered the chamber slowly, her veil once again covering her face, though this time she found herself wanting to look at him, just to see if what she had glimpsed before was real. He was already waiting, standing tall but not rigid, as if he wanted to appear strong yet approachable at the same time. When their eyes met again, her breath caught in her throat. It was the same as yesterday, firm but not cruel, steady but not threatening. He spoke first. His words were simple, polite greetings, asking if she was comfortable on the ship, if she had everything she needed. She hesitated before answering, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Yes, she replied, though she wasn't sure if it was entirely true. The human commander nodded, not pressing her for more, and the conversation paused. For a while, the silence stretched, but it was not the heavy, frightening silence she had feared. Instead, it felt like space given to her, as though he understood. She was not ready to say much. That thought surprised her. Was it possible that he was patient, Humans were never described as patient in the stories she knew. They were described as quick to anger, always rushing, always fighting. Yet here he was, standing calmly, waiting for her. She gathered a little courage and dared to glance around the room. The chamber was simple, far less decorated than the grand halls of her palace. Human design, she realized, was practical, made for use rather than beauty. Yet there was something honest in its plainness. It was strong, functional, reliable. Perhaps humans were the same. When her gaze returned to him, she noticed something else. His eyes studied her, yes, but not in a way that felt harsh. It was as though he was trying to understand her rather than judge her. The thought both comforted and confused her. She had expected to feel like an object under his stare, but instead she felt seen. As the meeting continued, he spoke again. This time about the agreement between their worlds. His words were steady, chosen carefully. He did not boast of victory, nor did he speak of her people as if they were weaker. Instead, he emphasized respect, saying he hoped this union would not only bring peace but also understanding. The princess listened in silence, her heart slowly untangling from its fear. She still did not trust easily, but the way he spoke made her question her own certainty. Could this man truly be the ruthless figure she had been warned about? His tone carried no cruelty, only responsibility. At one point, his gaze softened slightly, and he said something that struck her deeply. I know this arrangement was not your choice, but I want you to know. I will not force you into anything you are not ready for. The words stunned her. She lifted her head more fully, now her eyes wide beneath the veil. No one had ever said such a thing to her before, not even among her own people. Duty was always above all else. Choice was rarely hers. Yet here was a man, a human of all beings, telling her that he would not impose his will upon her. It was as though a door had opened in her heart, letting in a small ray of light. The conversation ended after some time, and she returned to her quarters once again. But now her thoughts were restless in a new way. She paced the floor, remembering his words, his expression, the calm tone of his voice. She sat on her bed, pressing her hands together, whispering to herself. What kind of human is he? The days that followed, she saw more of him. Sometimes it was during meals, sometimes during brief discussions about customs and traditions. Each time, she expected the mask to fall, for him to reveal the ruthless nature she had been told was hidden beneath. But each time he remained steady, respectful, and surprisingly gentle. One afternoon she watched him with his soldiers. She had prepared herself to see a harsh commander, barking orders without care, but what she saw was different. He was strict, yes, but fair. When one soldier made a mistake, he did not lash out with anger. Instead, he corrected him firmly but clearly, guiding rather than humiliating. The men respected him not out of fear but out of loyalty. The princess felt something shift inside her again. Could it be that the stories were only half-truths? That humans were strong because they had to be, not because they enjoyed cruelty? She remembered her childhood fears and realized how far away they seemed now compared to what her own eyes were showing her. That night, lying awake, she thought about her first glimpse of him. She remembered how her heart had pounded with dread, how she had been too afraid to even look up. And then she remembered his calm gaze, his soft words, his promise not to force her. A small, hesitant warmth bloomed inside her chest. Fragile, but real. For the first time, she wondered if this marriage might not be the end of her freedom, but the beginning of something she could not yet name. She still carried fear, but it was no longer the same heavy, crushing fear as... The days that followed became a journey of discovery for the princess. At first, she kept expecting the mask to fall, waiting for the human commander to reveal the cruel nature that the old stories had warned her about. She told herself not to be deceived by politeness or kind words, for perhaps it was just a strategy to make her lower her guard. But the more time she spent near him, the harder it became to hold on to that belief. She began to notice the little things. He always greeted her with a respectful nod, Never too close, never too forceful. If she struggled to find words, he waited patiently, giving her time. He asked her questions about her people, not to mock, but to learn. He seemed genuinely curious about their customs, their foods, their music, even the way they told stories. It surprised her, because she had imagined a man too proud to care about anything beyond his own world. One evening, she found herself sitting across from him at a quiet dinner. At first, silence hung between them, heavy and uncertain. She kept her eyes on her plate, her hands moving carefully as if any mistake would draw judgment. Then he spoke. His words were simple, asking if she missed home. Her heart gave a sudden ache because, yes, she missed her world terribly. The gardens, the halls, the voices of her people. She nodded softly, her throat tight, and whispered, "Every day." For a moment she feared he might dismiss her feelings. But instead he nodded too, his voice calm as he said, "I know how it feels. I have lived away from my home for many years. I miss it as well." His words startled her because she had never imagined a human, especially one of power, admitting to something so vulnerable. She dared to glance at him and saw no cruelty, no arrogance, only honesty. For the first time, she felt a thread of connection between them. Over the next days, she paid more attention to how he treated others. With his soldiers, he was firm, but never unfair. When one of his men stumbled in his duties, the commander corrected him without anger, explaining clearly how to improve. His men did not shrink away from him in fear. Instead, they seemed to stand taller in his presence, as if his belief in them gave them strength. That, more than anything, shook her. Ruthless men ruled by fear, but this man seemed to lead by respect. One morning, she watched from a distance as he helped a young soldier train. The man was clearly struggling, sweat running down his face, his movements clumsy. Instead of scolding him harshly, the commander demonstrated the technique himself, showing the soldier step by step until he could perform it correctly. When the soldier finally managed, the commander clapped him on the shoulder, offering encouragement. The soldier's face lit up with pride. The princess's heart stirred at the sight. This was not the behavior of a cruel man. It was the behavior of someone who wanted others to succeed. Her walls of fear began to crumble, piece by piece. One afternoon, as they walked together through the corridors of the ship, he asked her about her childhood. At first she hesitated, unsure if it was safe to share. But his eyes held a calm patience that made her feel she could. She told him about the gardens of her palace, the crystal lakes where she had played as a child, the songs her people sang during festivals. To her surprise, he listened intently, asking gentle questions, smiling softly at the details. She had expected him to find her world unimportant, but instead he treated her words as if they were treasures. In return, he spoke of his own home. He described the mountains of earth, the forests that stretched for miles, the oceans that roared with power. His voice carried warmth when he spoke of his childhood, of running freely through the wild fields, of watching storms light the skies. She found herself leaning forward, drawn into the images he painted. For the first time she realized that perhaps humans were not just creatures of violence, they were people with families, with memories, with hearts that longed for home just as hers did. Each day that passed, her fear faded a little more, replaced by something softer. She began to see not just a human commander, but a man who carried the same weight of responsibility she did. He was not ruthless, as the stories claimed. He was strong, yes, but his strength was guided by compassion. At night, lying awake in her quarters, she thought of him often. She thought of his eyes, steady but kind. She thought of his voice, calm but firm. She thought of the way he never forced her, never dismissed her, always gave her space to be herself. Slowly, her heart began to accept something she had never imagined before, the possibility that this union might not be a burden but a blessing. The day of the ceremonial union approached, and the princess found herself in a place she never thought she would be. At first, when the arrangement had been announced, she had felt only fear and despair. But now, as she looked ahead, she felt something very different stirring inside her heart. She thought back to her first days on the human ship, how her hands had trembled, how her chest had been heavy with dread. She remembered how she had expected cruelty in his eyes, and how shocked she had been to find warmth instead. Step by step, he had shown her that the stories of her childhood had been only half the truth. Humans were strong, yes, but they were also capable of kindness, loyalty, and respect. The night before the ceremony, she stood alone in her quarters, looking out at the stars beyond the window. Her thoughts were full, yet her heart felt lighter than it had in many weeks. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, "I am not afraid anymore." The words felt strange, but they were true. When the day came, she was dressed once more in ceremonial robes. But unlike before, when the garments had felt like chains, this time they felt different. They no longer bound her. They carried her forward into a new chapter. As her attendants placed the veil gently over her face, she breathed deeply, steadying herself. Her heart still raced, but not with dread. It beat with anticipation. She walked the long corridor toward the ceremonial hall. The walls echoed with her footsteps, and the guards marched at her sides. But this time, instead of feeling like a prisoner being led to her fate, she felt like a princess walking with purpose. The hall doors opened, and there he was, waiting for her. The commander stood tall, his uniform immaculate, his eyes steady upon her. But when she approached, she noticed the faintest softness in his expression, a quiet reassurance. He did not smile widely, but his gaze carried something that reached her more deeply than words could. For the first time, she did not lower her eyes in fear. She lifted her chin and looked at him directly. The ceremony began. Words of union were spoken, formal vows exchanged between their peoples. As they stood side by side, the princess felt a calm settle over her. The fear that once clung to her was gone. She no longer saw him as a ruthless stranger, but as a man who had shown her respect and patience when he could have chosen dominance. When it was her turn to speak, her voice trembled at first, but she steadied it. She declared her willingness not only to join their worlds, but also to walk beside him in this new journey. Her words were simple, but they carried her truth. She was no longer standing there because she had no choice. She was standing there because her heart had found reason to accept it. When the commander spoke, his voice was calm but strong. He promised to protect her, to honor her, and to respect her voice as his equal. His words struck her deeply, for they were not the words of a man claiming ownership, but of a man offering partnership. As the ceremony ended, a quiet peace filled her. She turned to him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly meet his eyes without hesitation. In them she saw not ruthlessness, but a strength that carried compassion. She realized then that her heart had changed completely. Later, as they walked together out of the hall, the princess felt a sense of relief and hope she never thought she would feel. The fear of marrying a ruthless human had been replaced by the comfort of knowing the truth. He was not ruthless. He was strong, patient, and kind. And as she stepped into this new life, she carried not fear, but a quiet belief that this union could bring more than peace between their worlds. It could bring something far greater: trust, respect, and perhaps even love. For the first time since she had heard of this marriage, she did not feel trapped. She felt free.